Chinese health authorities are still working to identify the virus behind a pneumonia outbreak in the central city of Wuhan.
The city's mayor is urging people to leave the area, and he has reportedly asked the governor to call in the National Guard.
The Minneapolis mayor also says he does not.
How serious is this? Is this something that we need to be terrified of, or is this overblown, or how do you stand on this?
Also increasingly rely on food banks as unemployment numbers remain twice as high as pre-pandemic levels. And on October
outside watching as suddenly the flashbangs and the back and forth got very serious. We saw what appeared to be Molotov cocktails that were sort of sitting, and we were waiting to see what.
Realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men. And on, you know, they had the Muslim ban. There is no white guy ban. So what do we do about that?
Should you put to sea in a small sailing craft, you will likely be met with challenges not too different from those which our ancestors faced. There are no chandleries nor chain stores in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, nor are there any freshwater spigots. A ship therefore must be self-sufficient for the time she spends at sea. And even with the benefit of modern weather forecasting, the little sailing craft is prone to gales that occur even during the docile summer months, particularly on the Great Circle Path across the Atlantic from the U.S. East Coast to northern Europe. So we must prepare. All of her gear must be inspected, gone over. Anything suspect, replaced. A faulty piece of rigging could lead to a dismasting. A corroded through-hull fitting could lead to sinking. Of course, I will give my little craft paint and varnish, too, as I think it important that she look beautiful. Tidy, well-maintained craft always stand a better chance, both at sea and in port. At last, the work is completed, and Ruth Avery is gently lowered back into the muddy waters of the Chesapeake Bay. Ruth Avery is a sailing boat, so I use my dinghy with a small outboard to maneuver her in the confined waters of Broad Creek, and then out the channel into wider waters where the noisy motors can be put to rest and she can finally move under her own power, powered by the wind. And so it was on the 6th of June, 2020. I weighed anchor from Deltaville, Virginia, and began the long journey across the Atlantic to Ireland. I began working my way southward down the Chesapeake Bay toward the Bay Bridge Tunnel. But then the wind dies. Not having been able to get a haircut in a while due to the coronavirus shutdowns, I decided to take the opportunity to try to cut my own hair and give myself a shave while I was at it. Good enough for sailing solo. The winds remained light and the sailing pleasant well into the evening, but then this happened. We got total whiteout. Wind crops gusted 60 knots. Rain, hail. I can't tell if it's rain or hail. It is the 7th of June, 2020. And we finally made our way out of the Chesapeake Bay. We exited the Bay Bridge Tunnel this morning at about 5 a.m. Took us some time to get there from Deltaville. It's a run of about 40 miles, but we had light winds, and most of them from ahead. And then last night around 11 o'clock with the passage of the cold front, we had some thunderstorms go through that were really quite something. We want to talk in terms of our big number here. Leaves us with 2,861 miles to go to Fastnet Rock, which is a lot of freaking miles. So we take it day by day and just try to keep this old girl moving. Light winds persisted, and the ocean was so flat I started calling it Lake Atlantic. This of course meant slow progress. After nearly 1 week at sea, we barely made it past Cape Cod. On the other hand, life aboard was unusually pleasant. I could prepare and eat meals almost as if I was in harbor. And I could play my guitar. Always a good day at sea when I get to play my guitar. It seemed like whenever the winds did come in, they came in as headwinds. And then whenever they worked fair, they would just die away to nothing, and we were back to drifting. And whenever I got a rain shower, I collected as much fresh water as possible. Running out of fresh water was one of my biggest fears for this passage. But despite the slow progress, I savored the benign conditions. Things could be far worse than this. Approaching Nova Scotia, then Newfoundland, conditions remained more or less the same, only generally they got foggier. And as we worked our way past Cape Race, Newfoundland, and on to the Grand Banks, the weather got noticeably chillier. And when we entered the deep and wide waters of the Atlantic, where there are no safe harbors to run to, where outside help is far, then the North Atlantic began to roar. First pulse of strong wind prompted me to test out my brand new storm trysail. In general, I was pleased with the result, though she did roll quite a bit. Cold and wet weather, ragged gray skies and strong winds became the norm for the next 1,500 miles. Though those strong winds were fair in direction, and Ruth Avery was sailing fast. The North Atlantic is generally a lonely and desolate place, but you do occasionally get the odd visitor, as in the case of this big sperm whale that surfaced right next to me. Yeah, big old sperm whale. Prolonged periods of rough weather can make life really hard, especially at night. The constant violent motion causes fatigue. Any venture up on deck requires suiting up in cumbersome foul weather gear, and there's no escaping from it. Of course, matters on deck must be attended to. If she is not suitably canvassed for the conditions, or if the self-steering wind vane needs to be reset, or simply that something on deck has gotten loose and needs to be lashed down. running in gale conditions with large seas. Often the self-steering wind vane cannot be trusted, requiring me to be on deck, ready to take over at the helm should a large wave get her the wrong way and try to broach her. The days passed and the miles melted away. A triple reef main with a small heavy weather staysail became working canvas, as frequently she could not hold on to anything more. Yet even that small spread of canvas had her bows splitting the slate gray seas and turning them snow white. She was moving at racing speed, as fast as her hull would efficiently allow. It's now over 1 month at sea, and I'm venting my frustrations by singing old sea chanties. I'll stay no more on this fine shore, so let the music play. Miles away. At the start of our 33rd day at sea, we fall in with some playful common dolphins. Then the sky clears and we are greeted with brilliant sunshine for the first time in several weeks. And we are still in company with the dolphins. Well, it is the 9th of July, 2020. That, my friends, is Ireland. By late afternoon, we have the iconic Fastnet Rock abeam. And then we are leaving it behind in our wake as we approach Baltimore Bay. A subscriber and an RIB comes out to welcome me. So Tom has a mooring for me once I get inside the harbor here of Baltimore Bay. But of course, first that means I have to tack in through a somewhat narrow entrance. On the other hand, I'm greeted with some impressive scenery. And last of all, I have to sail the boat up to a mooring. It's always a tricky call when to push that helm down and shoot her up into the wind so that she'll stop right at the mooring. While there's no shame in missing, it can be quite a pain when you do. Can you just hand me the... I got it? There, yeah, I got it. Tom also left me with some fresh groceries and a bottle of water. A welcome change from ship stores. Just after sundown, the winds fell light. I could only hear little wavelets lapping against the hull just before I collapsed in my bunk and fell asleep. So after clearing with customs, catching up on sleep, and replenishing my provisions, it was time to go cruising. Unsheltered inland waters, thank you very much. My first cruise was up the River Island, where I worked my way all the way up to Old Court, which has to be done at or near high tide. And then back down the river on a considerably more blustery day, sailing out past the 2 boatyards in Old Court, one of which is the famous Hegarty's Yard. You see the light blue vessel there, that's the Island, which was designed by the famous Irish circumnavigator Conor O'Brien. Following the River Island cruise, I am off again, this time eastbound along the south coast of Ireland, headed toward Kinsale. By late afternoon, we round the bold old head of Kinsale and set course up the River Bannon toward the Kinsale Yacht Club. Well, while the transatlantic ended with having to sail up to a mooring, today's sail ends with having to sail up to a dock, which is a bit more tricky, especially since the currents in the Bannon River run quite swift. It was lucky that I caught it right about at slack tide. So after a few missed line throws, we get things under control and pull Ruth Avery safely alongside. I stayed for a week at the Kinsale Yacht Club as a guest of another American, also named Kevin. That was the fellow in the yellow shirt. And we established the fine tradition of pub night at the local pub in Kinsale, which was still possible despite the shutdowns due to the virus. And it so happened that our first pub night was on the eve of a horrific Force 11 storm named Ellen that came tearing into the Irish Sea, and it hit just after midnight, and I had barely made it back to the boat in time. And I was sure glad that I decided to pick up one of the heavy trawler moorings in the river, as I doubt my anchor would have held in those conditions. And had the mooring failed, there was nothing I could have done. It would have been shipwrecked for sure. Well, it is nearly September, which means that unless you're planning to winter over in Ireland, it's time to start planning your trip south. The reason for this being that the frequency and intensity of low-pressure systems coming into the Irish Sea and Bay of Biscay is now increasing, now that we're getting into the fall. So I'm on my way to the Super Value supermarket at the top of the hill to top off on provisions. Then once I have a clear weather forecast, it'll be time to say farewell to Ireland. So, on a misty morning of September 4th, I weigh anchor and begin working my way down the Bannon River. Once out by the old head of Kinsale, the more powerful gusts prompt me to tie a reef in the staysail and then a second reef in the mainsail. Once offshore, we are well canvassed in the moderate westerly winds and moving south at a good clip. And we get a little bit of sunshine, though I can feel the chill in that air coming off the cold Irish Sea. There are volumes of horror stories about the Bay of Biscay, though my crossing turned out to be mostly a delight, with gentle breezes, relatively flat seas, and beautiful blue ocean water that was already noticeably warmer. Although the wind got quite a bit fresher as we approached the northwest coast of Spain, where we also encountered a fair bit of shipping. For our rounding of Cape Finisterre, we had light winds and pleasant conditions. But then this happened. For the next 2 days, we had no wind at all, leaving us to drift helplessly off the coast of Spain. Finally, on the morning of September 12th, we picked up a gentle northerly breeze, and I gave her full sail and set course for Bayona, Spain. The bold topography of the Spanish coastline, combined with the old world architecture, surely made for the most romantic landfall of the voyage. And now it is nearly October, and it is not advised to remain in Bayona too late into the fall, as the weather windows for heading offshore, southbound to the Canaries, will become fewer and further in between. Judging by the mass exodus of boats earlier this morning, and I am the last transient yacht to weigh anchor today, it appears at least we're all looking at the same weather page, which is calling for moderate northerly trade winds all the way down to the Canary Islands. We'll see how true that is. We have gentle breezes for our departure, but once offshore the Portuguese trades fill in fresh, prompting me to reef her down. Portuguese trade winds blow fresh and true for most of the passage, and 1 week later we are falling in with Lanzarote, the northernmost island of the Canary Islands. As per usual, we're racing daylight, trying to get an anchor down before nightfall, and we just barely succeed at that. Though the anchorage is somewhat exposed, in the bottom there are tiny coral heads, which all seem to conspire to foul my anchor chain. Nonetheless, the anchorage behind Papagayo Beach is one of the most beautiful anywhere, and the water is clear and blue and warm enough for swimming. The Marina Rubicon is about a mile from the anchorage, and you can land your dinghy there and walk to the Superdino, which is a small grocery store. It's a bit of a long, hot walk in the sun, but for fresh groceries, it's certainly worth it. But a small grocery store will not do when it comes to provisioning for a transatlantic crossing. So I departed Lanzarote for an overnight sail to Gran Canaria, into Las Palmas. Las Palmas is a big commercial port, and approaching in light winds and big swells and having big ships around me in an engineless boat is not a feeling of security. Although once you reach the anchorage beside the big marina at Las Palmas, it gets a little more hospitable. The anchorage is a bit deep, about 25 to 30 feet of water. However, it does appear to have good holding in sand. Now, Las Palmas is a big city, and it does have a couple large supermarkets not too far from the marina. You can also get a pass at the marina at Las Palmas, which gives you access to the showers and, more importantly, access to the water taps on the docks. So Las Palmas lives up to its billing as a good place to provision for an Atlantic crossing. Hi, Susan. I think it's about 4, is it?
Across the trolley. So now I realize I'm in a polar bear country.
You will meet many sailors in Las Palmas. Some of them veteran sailors, such as this Swedish couple on Seawind. They also just came across the Atlantic, but stopped in Greenland. Last I checked, they were on their way to South America, and then Cape Horn, and then Antarctica. Yes, you heard that right, Antarctica. Well, I'm not headed to Antarctica. Just a westbound run across the Atlantic and the trade winds will do it for me. So as the sun settles down in the west, we gradually take our departure from the Canary Islands. But the following day we are stalled, finding ourselves in the wind shadow of Gran Canary, and it takes nearly the entire afternoon to escape it. But when the trade winds do fill in, they come in strong and true, and we are on our way. The winds dip a few days later, however, due to a tropical storm passing to the north of me. I take this opportunity to catch up on a few small repairs. I learned through Garmin InReach that this tropical storm was doing havoc to the Vendée Globe fleet, which had just departed France. I was thankful to be well south of it. And then the trade winds returned, initially quite fresh indeed, getting up to near gale force at times. For the next 11 days, we had moderate to fresh easterly trade winds. Though the ride was not always very comfortable, Ruth Avery was tearing along at top speed. In fact, it was setting up to be a record run for such a small boat. But it was not to be. On the start of our 4th week at sea, on November 29th, the wind left us. After several days of drifting, I found myself trying to catch every cat's paw of wind that came my way, always hoping that that wind was heralding the return of the northeasterly trade winds. We have to jibe this mainsail over. And time and again, I was met with disappointment as the wind just dropped back to nothing. I took the opportunity to splash over the side and get some grease on the trim tab shaft, as well as knock off some of the goose barnacles, in hopes of improving her light air performance. And of course, there was always my guitar. And so on it went. No wind. And we are entering new belt notch territory here. So that was my most common notch. So we've gone one notch past that. And even still, it's not too tight. So, ocean voyages are definitely a diet plan here. So let's take a look at the big chart here. We haven't done that in a while. We departed on November 8th from the Canary Islands and headed west-southwest across the Atlantic, and we're headed toward the Virgin Islands here. And today is Friday, the 4th of December, so we're coming up on 1 month at sea. And we're approximately at 54 and a half west and a little north of 19 north. So here's 55 west, so 54 and a half. So we're right about here, right where the tip of the pen is. And we're going to the Virgin Islands, which mercifully is not distance-wise, considering all the distance we've done so far, is not too far. It's about 580 miles from where we're presently at. Our problem is the wind is just not cooperating. Of course, the wind had to come in again, and it did some 8 days later. And so it was once again on our 33rd day at sea. We fall in with the land. This time with St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands. Yeah, good morning. I just arrived from the Canary Islands. And I'm a U.S. flag vessel. So once I cleared in with U.S. Customs, I made a beeline for the Starfish Market, which is a small but well-stocked supermarket in Cruz Bay. Now rested and well-fed, I continue on westward through the Virgin Islands, visiting some of my old haunts. Ahoy, everybody! And Happy New Year! It is the 9th of January, 2021. And we are, well, we just departed St. Thomas. And we got our snout pointed toward Culebra, Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico just came out of COVID lockdown yesterday. So harbors are open. So I'm sailing. It was good to have rest in St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands for a while, and chance to replenish on water and food and cooking gas and catch up on sleep, do some boat projects. So we're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed here and raring to go. We got an absolutely beautiful day out here. Sounding like a game show host today for some reason. But got about 10 to 15 knots of wind out of the east, standard issue trade winds. Not too strong. And seas are pretty flat. And from here we probably got about 15, maybe a little less than 15 miles to Culebra, so not too far to go. I think it's about 11 in the morning now, so we should be in mid-afternoon. The little island of Culebra offers some of the finest anchorages in the Eastern Caribbean. And it's just a great place for a little R&R after a lot of strenuous sailing. But soon I'm on the road again, continuing on westward, down around the south coast of Puerto Rico, calling at Salinas and then Boquerón, and one fine anchorage in between. The south coast of Puerto Rico offers many beautiful anchorages, as well as some impressive scenery. From Boquerón, we now come on to a northwesterly heading to Luperón, which is near Puerto Plata in the Dominican Republic. Luperón is a very well-protected harbor, with generally ample room to anchor. However, it presents a bit of a tricky entrance for the engineless sailboat. And once again, my sailing skills are put to the test. After securing a spot and going through the customs and immigration rigmarole of Luperón, which took most of the afternoon, I'm finally free to do a little mini safari in the Dominican Republic. I rent a car and drive to Puerto Plata, where I meet up with my friend Steve Brulé in Costambar. Good morning, Steve.
How you doing, man?
We visit the famous town of Sosua, where the beach is beautiful and the party never ends. If sailing into Luperón is tricky, sailing out is even trickier, as typically you're going to meet with an onshore swell once you leave the sheltered waters. It's also further complicated by the fact that you have to get a despacho from the authorities before you can leave, which makes it a little more difficult to time exactly when your departure will be. So we say bye-bye to the Dominican Republic. And begin the long winding road through the Bahamas back to Miami, Florida. But a forecast for several days of headwinds obliges me to drop anchor in the Berry Islands, where I remain on the boat in quarantine for several days until the winds turn fair again. And again I make an overnight stop behind Chub Key so that I might cross the Bahama Bank during daylight hours the following day. Oh, a forlorn little beacon there. We enter onto the Bahama Bank via the Northwest Channel and cross from the old Russell Beacon to South Riding Rock. Crossing the Bahama Bank is an interesting trip, as you're sailing a distance of about 40 miles, not having more than about 1 meter of water beneath your keel, which is a little unnerving. Then it's overnight across the Gulf Stream to Key Biscayne, which is opposite Miami, Florida. And I will drop anchor right off a no-name harbor. And we have now returned to U.S. waters. It's easy to get complacent for this last leg from Key Biscayne to the Chesapeake Bay. Might seem like a victory lap, but it's a considerable ocean passage, and no ocean passage is to be discounted. From the bumpy Gulf Stream with its swift current to the constant cycle of squalls, followed by calms, There's plenty to keep us busy. I put into the Cape Lookout Bight to anchor for a day while waiting for better weather to go around Cape Hatteras. But Cape Hatteras nonetheless throws its slings and arrows at me. Brisk northerly winds push me east, and I get out into the swift Gulf Stream current. And then I get light winds trying to recover the lost distance. All the while I'm racing the clock against another nasty weather system approaching from the southwest. Don't quite make it. I enter into the Chesapeake Bay, passing the Bay Bridge Tunnel just after midnight, in strong easterly winds, rain, and squalls. So quite the dark and stormy night. I work my way into Poquoson in the wee hours of the following morning, the morning of April 25th, where I put my anchor down, feeling exhausted and thoroughly whipped. Well, as I said, no ocean passage is to be discounted. But at least the sail to Deltaville was pleasant. After spending a day in Poquoson, catching up on some sleep, I weigh anchor in the morning to cover the remaining 30 miles to Fishing Bay. And then it's out around Stingray Point, and one remaining challenge, which is to navigate the narrow channel leading into Broad Creek. Also a bit of a tricky place for an engineless boat. And so on May 1st of 2021, we are back on the muddy waters of Broad Creek, where this odyssey began nearly 11 months ago.
Look at that, got the whole rainbow. Yeah, almost the whole second one too.